The monitors beeped a steady rhythm as I sat beside Mark's hospital bed, my fingers intertwined with his. His once strong hands now felt fragile, like bird's bones. The cancer had ravaged his body, leaving behind a shell of the man I had married 8 years ago. His eyes were closed, but I knew he wasn't sleeping. The pain medications kept him in a twilight state, not quite here, not quite gone. "Ella," he whispered, his voice barely audible over the hum of medical equipment. "I'm sorry." I squeezed his hand gently. "You have nothing to be sorry for." He tried to smile, but it looked more like a grimace. The stomach cancer had spread rapidly. Despite all our efforts, we had the means, good insurance, savings set aside for emergencies, but money couldn't buy more time. Not the kind that mattered anyway. "Ethan," he said, his eyes fluttering open for a moment. "Promise me you'll tell him every day." I nodded, tears flowing freely now. "I'll tell him every day how much his daddy loved him. Every single day." Our son was 5, too young to understand what was happening, but old enough to know something was terribly wrong. Mark's parents, Linda and Robert, had taken him to their home for the day. They had been our rock through this entire ordeal, showing up without being asked, bringing meals, watching Ethan, sitting with me during the endless waiting room hours. My own parents were a different story. They had visited exactly twice since Mark's diagnosis 18 months ago. Both times their visits lasted less than an hour, and they spent most of that time talking about my sister Jessica's latest accomplishments. Jessica, the golden child, whose life always seemed to eclipse mine in their eyes. "Your sister just got that promotion at the bank," my mother had said during their last visit, while Mark dozed uncomfortably in his hospital bed. "Youngest branch, manager in the company's history. We're taking her out to celebrate next weekend." I had simply nodded, too exhausted to feel the sting of her words. That was 3 weeks ago, and I hadn't heard from them since, apart from a text asking if Mark was getting any better. I hadn't bothered to reply. The doctor came in, clipboard in hand, his face a practiced mask of professional compassion. "Mrs. Walsh, can I speak with you outside for a moment?" I kissed Mark's forehead before following the doctor into the hallway. The words washed over me like cold water. Transitioning to comfort care, a matter of days, possibly hours, making him comfortable. I heard them all, but they seemed to come from far away, as if I were underwater. I called Linda and Robert first. They promised to bring Ethan to say goodbye. Then, against my better judgment, I called my parents. "Mom, it's time. The doctors say Mark doesn't have much longer. Could you and Dad come? I need you here." The pause on the line was deafening. "Oh, Ella, honey," my mother finally said, her voice tinged with what sounded like genuine regret, but I knew better. "This weekend is Jessica's promotion party. We've been planning it for months. You know how important this is for her career." I closed my eyes, leaning against the sterile hospital wall. "Mom, my husband is dying, right now. I understand that. But we've already paid the deposit for the venue. Besides, there's nothing we can do for Mark at this point, is there? We'll come by next week, once things have settled." The line went dead before I could respond. I stared at my phone in disbelief. Though I don't know why I was surprised. This was entirely in character for my parents. Jessica first, always, even when my world was ending. I wiped my tears and went back to Mark's room. I wouldn't waste what little time we had left thinking about my parents. Mark died at 3:17 a.m., with me on one side of his bed and his parents on the other. Ethan was asleep in a recliner in the corner of the room, Linda having brought him in earlier so Mark could see him one last time. Mark had been lucid briefly, enough to tell Ethan how proud he was to be his dad and how much he loved him. Then he'd slipped away a little at a time until his breathing stuttered to a stop. I thought I had prepared myself for this moment over the long months of his illness, but nothing could have prepared me for the hollow ache that opened inside me. When the monitors flatlined and the room filled with the harsh sound of medical alarms. The next few days passed in a blur. Linda and Robert helped me make funeral arrangements. Mark had been clear about what he wanted: a simple ceremony, his favorite songs, no black clothes. "I want color," he'd said months ago, when we could still talk about these things without breaking down. "I want laughter and good stories. Promise. Me, Ella." I had promised, and I was determined to keep my word. The day before the memorial service, I called my parents again, hoping against hope that they might have reconsidered. "Mom, the service is tomorrow at 2. Mark's parents have been so helpful, but I really need you and Dad there too." Another pause. I could hear voices in the background, laughter, the clink of glasses. "Ella, we're at Jessica's party right now," my mother said, her voice slightly slurred. "I told you, we've had this planned for ages. We can't just cancel. Jessica worked so hard for this promotion." "And I worked so hard to keep my husband alive," I said, my voice breaking. "But I guess that doesn't matter to you." "Now that's not fair," my father cut in, apparently having taken the phone. "Your sister has achieved something remarkable. You chose to marry young and have a child right away. Those were your choices." I could hardly believe what I was hearing. My choice? "Dad, Mark dying of cancer wasn't a choice." "You know what I mean," he said dismissively. "Anyway, we've already sent flowers. The girl at the funeral home said they're very nice." I hung up without saying goodbye. Flowers. As if a vase of lilies could replace their presence, their support. Linda found me sobbing in the bathroom an hour later. "They're not coming," I managed to say between gasps. "My own parents are skipping Mark's funeral for my sister's promotion party." Linda pulled me into her arms, her embrace firm and maternal in a way my own mother's had never been. "Then it's their loss," she said simply. "We're here. We'll always be here." The memorial service was beautiful in the way that terribly sad things can sometimes be beautiful. The chapel was filled with Mark's colleagues, our friends, even some of his former patients. Mark had been a physical therapist, beloved by the people whose mobility he'd helped restore. I recognized faces from our neighborhood, from Ethan's, preschool, from the cancer support group I'd sporadically attended. My parents' absence was a physical ache, a hole in the room that I couldn't help but notice. Jessica didn't come either. I hadn't really expected her to, but a small, childish part of me had hoped she might defy our parents just this once. I stood up to speak, my hands trembling as I unfolded the paper where I'd written what I wanted to say about Mark, about his kindness, his patience, his unfailing sense of humor, even when things were at their worst. About how he'd never once complained, not even at the end when the pain became unbearable. About how he'd loved our son with a fierce, protective devotion that made my heart swell even as it broke. Halfway through, I looked up and saw Ethan sitting on Robert's lap, his small face solemn and confused, so young to lose his father, so young to learn that life could be unfathomably cruel. Linda sat beside them, tears streaming down her face, but her back straight, her eyes fixed on me with such love and support that I found the strength to continue. After the service, we gathered at our house. Friends had arranged a potluck, saving me from having to think about food. Ethan stayed close to me, his small hand gripping mine tightly as we accepted condolences and listened to stories about Mark that made us laugh through our tears. It was nearly evening when the doorbell rang. I assumed it was another neighbor dropping off a casserole, but when I opened the door, I found my parents standing there, looking uncomfortable. "We thought we'd stop by on our way home from Jessica's party," my mother said, leaning in to kiss my cheek as if this were just a casual visit. "The party was a great success, by the way. Everyone was so impressed with—" "Stop," I said, stepping back from the doorway. "Just stop. My husband's funeral was today. The funeral you chose to skip for a party. I don't want to hear about Jessica's success right now." My father frowned. There's no need for that tone, Ella. We're here now, aren't we? Better late than never. I stared at them, these people who had raised me, but who seemed incapable of understanding my pain or needs. They were dressed formally, my mother in an expensive navy dress, my father in a suit that probably cost more than what we'd spent on the entire memorial service. They looked out of place among the casual gathering of mourners in our living room. You should have been there, I said quietly. Not later, not after, during. You should have been there for me today. My mother sighed dramatically. Well, we're here now, and we'd like to talk to you about some practical matters. Practical matters? I repeated. My father nodded, glancing around at the people in our home as if assessing their value. Financial matters, Mark's insurance, the house, that sort of thing. We're concerned about you and Ethan, of course. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Mark wasn't even cold in his grave. Wasn't even in his grave yet, as we'd scheduled the burial for the following day. And they were here to talk about money? This isn't the time, I said firmly. Please leave. Ella, be reasonable, my mother said, lowering her voice. You're a young widow with a child. You need to think about these things, and we're only trying to help. Before I could respond, Linda appeared at my side, her arm slipping around my waist in a gesture of solidarity. I believe my daughter-in-law asked you to leave, she said, her voice steel wrapped in velvet. This is a day for remembering Mark, not discussing finances. My father bristled. And who exactly are you to interfere in a family matter? Family? I laughed, the sound harsh and foreign to my own ears. You forfeited the right to call yourselves that when you chose a party over being there for me on the worst day of my life. Now, see here, my father began, but I cut him off. No. You see here, Mark's parents have been more family to me in the past 2 years than you've been my entire life. They've shown up, they've helped, they've cared, so please just go. We can talk about practical matters some other time. My mother's face hardened. I think you're being terribly unfair, Ella. We've always supported you. When? I challenged. When have you ever put me first? Name one time. She opened her mouth, then closed it again, her eyes darting to my father for support. Your mother doesn't deserve this, he said, his tone disapproving. We raised you better than this. Did you? Because from where I'm standing, you raised me to believe I was less important than Jessica, less worthy of your time, your attention, your love. And today, you proved it beyond any doubt. I felt Linda's arm tighten around me, offering silent support. I think it's best if you go now, she said to my parents. Ella has been through enough today. My father looked like he wanted to argue, but something in Linda's expression must have stopped him. He took my mother's elbow and guided her back, toward the door. We'll call you tomorrow, he said over his shoulder, once you've had time to calm down and think rationally. I didn't bother to respond. I simply closed the door behind them and returned to the gathering, to the people who had actually cared enough about Mark and me to be there when it mattered. Later that night, after everyone had gone and Ethan had finally fallen asleep, I sat on the porch swing Mark had installed the summer before his diagnosis. Linda came out with 2 cups of tea, handing one to me before settling beside me on the swing. You did well today, she said softly. Mark would have been proud. I nodded, unable to speak past the lump in my throat. Your parents, she began, then seemed to think better of it, have always been like this, I finished for her. Jessica is their pride and joy. I'm just an afterthought. Linda shook her head. I can't understand that. I really can't. If Mark had had siblings, I could never have imagined treating one differently than the other. I sipped my tea, the warmth spreading through my chest. A small comfort. They've always favored her. Better grades, more popular, more ambitious. I was the dreamy one, The one who wanted to write children's books and marry for love rather than status. A disappointment in their eyes. Their loss, Linda said firmly. Because you are extraordinary, Ella. What you did for Mark, how you've protected Ethan through all this, that's real strength, real character. I leaned my head against her shoulder, grateful beyond words for her presence. I don't know what I would have done without you and Robert these past months. You never have to find out, she promised. We're not going anywhere. True to their word, my parents called the next morning, catching me as I was getting Ethan ready for the small private burial service. Ella, we need to discuss Mark's estate, my father said without preamble. As Ethan's grandparents, we feel we should have some input on how his inheritance is managed. I nearly dropped the phone. Excuse me? Don't be difficult, dear, my mother chimed in. We're only thinking of Ethan's future. Your father has some excellent investment ideas that could really maximize Mark's insurance payout. Stop, I said, my voice steadier than I expected. Just stop. Mark and I have everything in order. We met with financial advisors and lawyers when he was first diagnosed. His life insurance goes into a trust for Ethan, with me as trustee. The house is paid off. We have savings. We're secure. But nothing. This isn't your concern. My father's voice hardened. Ethan is our grandson. His welfare is absolutely our concern. Funny how his welfare wasn't your concern yesterday. When you couldn't be bothered to attend his father's funeral, I retorted. We've apologized for that, my mother said, though they hadn't. Not really. We're trying to make it up to you now by helping with the practical aspects. I took a deep breath. I don't need your help, and frankly, I'm not sure I want you in our lives right now. Silence on the line, then my father's voice cold with anger. I think you're making a serious mistake, Ella. We're only trying to help. No, I said quietly. You're trying to control. There's a difference. I hung up, my hands shaking, but my resolve firm. I had lost my husband. I would not lose control of his legacy, too. The burial was intimate. Just me, Ethan, Linda, and Robert. We each placed a single white rose on Mark's casket before it was lowered into the ground. Ethan didn't fully understand what was happening, but he seemed to grasp the gravity of the moment, his small face solemn as he copied our actions. Goodbye, Daddy, he whispered, and my heart shattered all over again. We went back to Linda and Robert's house afterward. They had prepared a simple meal, and we ate in subdued silence, each lost in our own memories of Mark. Ethan eventually wandered off to play with the toys they kept for him, leaving the three of us at the table. Your parents called us this morning, Robert said unexpectedly. I looked up, surprised. They did? Why? Linda and Robert exchanged glances. They wanted to discuss Mark's will, Linda said carefully. They seemed to think there might be provisions for them. I stared at them, disbelief giving way to anger. There aren't. Mark left everything to me and Ethan. We know, Robert assured me. We just thought you should know they called. They seemed quite insistent. I pushed my plate away, my appetite gone. They've never shown any interest in our finances before. Why now? Linda reached across the table to take my hand. I don't want to speak ill of your parents, Ella, but they see dollar signs, I finished for her. Life insurance, the house, Mark's retirement accounts. Robert nodded grimly. We told them it wasn't our place to discuss any of this, that they needed to talk to you. I'm sorry if we overstepped. You didn't, I assured them. I'm glad you told me. I spent that night in our empty house, the first night alone since Mark had died. Linda and Robert had offered to let Ethan and me stay with them, but I needed to face this sooner or later. Ethan fell asleep clutching the teddy bear Mark had given him on his last good day, and I lay in our bed, surrounded by Mark's absence. The next morning, I woke to incessant knocking at the front door. I stumbled downstairs, still in my pajamas, to find my parents on the doorstep. My father held a briefcase, and my mother was dressed as if for a business meeting. "We need to talk," my father said, pushing past me into the house. "About Ethan's future." I closed the door, too tired to argue about their uninvited appearance. "Ethan's future is secure. I told you that." My mother perched on the edge of the sofa, her posture rigid. "We think it would be best if you and Ethan moved in with us for a while. The house is too big for just the two of you, and you could save money by renting it out." I stared at her, unable to believe what I was hearing. "This is our home. Mark and I built a life here. I'm not leaving." My father opened his briefcase, pulling out some papers. "We've taken the liberty of consulting with a financial advisor. If you sold this house and invested the proceeds along with Mark's life insurance, you could set Ethan up very comfortably for college. We could help manage the funds, of course." The audacity took my breath away. "You want me to sell our home and give you control of the money? Are you serious?" "Don't be dramatic, Ella," my mother said dismissively. "We're trying to help. You're in no state to make major financial decisions right now." I crossed my arms, suddenly very aware that I was still in my pajamas while they sat, there in their expensive clothes, trying to take over my life. "I'm not selling the house. I'm not moving in with you. And I'm certainly not handing over control of anything to people who couldn't even be bothered to attend my husband's funeral." My father's face darkened. "We've apologized for that, repeatedly. How long are you going to hold it against us?" "Apologized?" I echoed incredulously. "When? When did you actually say you were sorry?" They exchanged glances, neither answering. "That's what I thought," I said. "You're not sorry. You just want to get your hands on Mark's money." My mother gasped. "That's a terrible thing to say. We're your parents." "Yes, you are," I agreed. "And that's the only reason I'm not throwing you out right now. But this conversation is over. Please, leave." My father stood, gathering his papers. "You're being irrational. We'll give you some time to think it over." He placed a business card on the coffee table. "This is the financial advisor we spoke with. Give him a call when you're ready to discuss this sensibly." I picked up the card and tore it in half. "I already have financial advisors. Mark and I took care of everything. I don't need your help." "Clearly you do," my mother sniffed, rising to her feet. "Look at you, wallowing in grief instead of thinking practically about the future." Something inside me snapped. "Get out," I said, my voice deadly quiet. "Get out of my house right now." "Ella, no. You don't get to skip my husband's funeral and then waltz in here talking about selling his home and investing his money. You don't get to pretend you care about us now when you've shown nothing but indifference for years. You don't get to decide what's best for me or for Ethan." My father drew himself up to his full height. "We are still your parents and Ethan's grandparents. We have rights." "No," I said firmly. "You don't. Not anymore. Not after this." I walked to the door and held it open. "Please leave and don't come back unless you're ready to offer support." Without conditions or controls, they left, but not without parting shots about my ingratitude and emotional instability. I locked the door behind them and sank to the floor, shaking with anger and grief. Later that day, I called the lawyer Mark and I had worked with to update our wills after his diagnosis. I explained what had happened and asked about my parents' claims. "They have no legal standing whatsoever," he assured me. "As Mark's widow and Ethan's mother, you have full control over the estate and the trust established for Ethan. Your parents cannot force you to sell your home or manage Mark's life insurance proceeds. They have no rights as grandparents unless you were proven to be an unfit mother, which is clearly not the case." "Could they try to get custody of Ethan?" I asked, voicing my deepest fear. "On what grounds?" he asked. "Being a grieving widow is not grounds for losing custody. From what you've told me, you're a loving, capable mother with financial stability and a strong support system in your in-laws. The courts would have no reason to intervene." I thanked him and hung up, feeling marginally better. I then called Linda to update her on the situation. "They want you to sell the house?" she repeated, horrified. After everything you and Mark went through to keep it during his illness? Apparently, I said bitterly. They seem to think I'm incapable of managing our finances without their help. That's ridiculous, Linda declared. You handled everything beautifully while Mark was sick. You're one of the most capable people I know. Her faith in me brought tears to my eyes. Thank you for saying that. It's the truth, she said firmly. Now what can we do to help? Do you want Robert to speak with them? I considered it, then shook my head, though she couldn't see me. No, I don't think that would help. They'd just see it as more interference. I think I need to handle this myself. Whatever you decide, we're behind you, Linda promised. 100%. The next few weeks were a blur of paperwork, phone calls, and sleepless nights. I dealt with Mark's life insurance company, updated bank accounts, and started the process of applying for survivor benefits for Ethan. Through it all, Linda and Robert were there, offering practical help and emotional support. My parents called several times, but I let their calls go to voicemail. Their messages became increasingly angry and accusatory, claiming I was keeping them from their grandson and wasting Mark's legacy through financial mismanagement, though they had no idea how I was handling our finances. Finally, about a month after Mark's death, they showed up unannounced again, this time with Jessica in tow. I had just put Ethan down for a nap when the doorbell rang. I opened the door to find the three of them standing there, Jessica looking uncomfortable sandwiched between our parents. We need to talk, my father announced. All of us, as a family. I sighed, too exhausted to fight. Fine, but keep your voices down. Ethan is napping. They filed into the living room, taking seats while I remained standing, arms crossed. Ella, my mother began, her voice deliberately gentle. We're worried about you. You're not returning our calls. You're isolating yourself. I'm grieving, I interrupted. My husband died a month ago. Of course you are, she said, with exaggerated patience. But life goes on. You have Ethan to think about. You can't just hide away from the world. I'm not hiding, I said, incredulous. I'm adjusting to a new reality, one where I'm a single parent and a widow at 32. My father cleared his throat. We've been talking, and we think it would be best if you and Ethan spent some time with us. A change of scenery would do you both good. I shook my head. No, Ethan needs stability right now, not disruption. This is his home. It was your home with Mark, my mother pointed out. Don't you think it might be easier to move forward somewhere new? Somewhere without so many memories? I don't want to move forward without the memories, I said softly. They're all Ethan and I have left of Mark. Jessica, who had been silent until now, finally spoke up. Ella, I know we haven't always been close, but I'm worried about you too. Maybe Mom and Dad are right. A fresh start might help. I looked at my sister, beautiful, successful Jessica, who had never experienced real loss or hardship in her charmed life. I appreciate your concern, I said, trying to keep the bitterness from my voice. But this isn't about what would be easier for me. It's about what's best for Ethan. And having family around isn't what's best for him? My father challenged. You weren't family when we needed you most, I said quietly. You chose a party over Mark's funeral? You've made it clear where your priorities lie. My mother's face hardened. That's not fair, Ella. We've apologized for missing the funeral. How long are you going to punish us for one mistake? This isn't about punishment, I said, my voice rising despite my intention to stay calm. This is about me making decisions. For my family based on who has actually shown up for us. We're trying to show up now, my father insisted. We want to help. By trying to get me to sell my home? By trying to take control of Mark's insurance money? That's not help. That's control. Jessica looked confused. Wait, what? Mom? Dad? You didn't mention anything about that. My parents exchanged glances, and I realized Jessica didn't know the full story. She'd been brought along as a peacemaker, unaware of their true intentions. They want me to sell the house and move in with them, I told her. They want to manage Mark's life insurance and our savings. They've consulted financial advisors without my knowledge or consent. Jessica turned to our parents, her expression shocked. Is that true? My father shifted uncomfortably. We're just trying to help Ella make sound financial decisions during a difficult time. By going behind her back? Jessica asked, sounding genuinely appalled. That's not okay. I found myself surprised by my sister's reaction. I had expected her to automatically side with our parents, as she always had. We're thinking of Ethan's future, my mother insisted. The money could be invested more wisely. That's not your decision to make, Jessica interrupted, surprising me again. Mark and Ella built a life together. She should get to decide what happens next. My father's face darkened. Stay out of this, Jessica. You don't understand the situation. I understand enough, she shot back. You're trying to control Ella's life when she's at her most vulnerable. That's not right. I stared at my sister, seeing her in a new light. For the first time in our adult lives, she was standing up to our parents, and she was doing it for me. Thank you, I said softly. Jessica met my eyes, and I saw genuine regret there. I'm sorry I missed the funeral. I should have been there for you, regardless of what Mom and Dad decided. My father stood abruptly. This is getting us nowhere. Ella, you need to be practical. The house is too big for just you and Ethan. The maintenance costs alone are well within my budget, I finished for him. Mark and I planned for this, Dad. We knew this day was coming. We made arrangements. I don't need financial advice or assistance. Everyone needs help sometimes, my mother insisted. Yes, I agreed. But not the kind you're offering. I need emotional support, not financial management. I need people who care about what I want, not what they think is best for me. We do care, my father said, sounding genuinely hurt. We're your parents. Then act like it, I challenged. Show up when it matters. Listen when I speak. Respect my decisions, even when they're not what you would choose. My mother's lips thinned. You're being unnecessarily difficult. And you're being incredibly insensitive, Jessica snapped, surprising all of us again. Ella just lost her husband. Can't you see that your timing is terrible? That your approach is all wrong? My parents looked taken aback by Jessica's outburst. They weren't used to her disagreeing with them, let alone criticizing them. We should go, Jessica said firmly, standing up. Ella needs space, not pressure. My father looked like he wanted to argue, but my mother tugged at his arm. Fine, he said stiffly. But this conversation isn't over, Ella. We're still your parents, and we still have concerns about how you're handling things. Noted, I said, coldly. But until you can respect my autonomy and my grief, I don't want to continue this discussion. After they left, with Jessica giving me a quick, awkward hug at the door, I sat on the sofa, emotionally drained. Jessica's unexpected support had caught me off guard. We had never been close, partly due to our parents' constant comparisons, and partly due to our different personalities and life choices. But today, she had seen the situation clearly and spoken up for me. I picked up my phone and sent her a text. Thank you for what you said today. It meant a lot. Her response came quickly. I should have said it sooner. I'm sorry. Can we talk sometime? Just the two of us? I hesitated, then replied, I'd like that. The next morning, I received an email from my father. The subject line read, Financial Proposal, and the body contained a detailed plan for how I should manage Mark's estate, including selling the house, investing the proceeds along with the life insurance money, and moving into a smaller apartment to reduce overhead. I deleted it without responding. That afternoon, Linda called to check in, as she did every day. How are you holding up? She asked, her voice warm with concern. I told her about my parents' visit and Jessica's unexpected support. I don't know what to make of it, I admitted. Jessica has always been their darling. I can't remember the last time she disagreed with them about anything important. People can surprise you, Linda said thoughtfully. Maybe she's finally seeing your parents' behavior clearly for the first time. Maybe, I agreed. She wants to meet for coffee, just the two of us. That could be good, Linda suggested. Having another ally in your corner wouldn't hurt. I considered this. You're right. I've been so used to thinking of Jessica as part of the problem that I never considered she might become part of the solution. Just be careful, Linda cautioned. Make sure she's not just acting as their emissary. I will, I promised. The next day, Jessica and I met at a small cafe near my house. She arrived first, already seated with 2 coffees when I walked in. I remembered you like lattes, she said, pushing one of the cups toward me. Thanks, I said, sliding into the seat across from her. That was thoughtful. An awkward silence fell between us. We had never been good at small talk, and now, with so much unspoken history between us, it seemed impossible to know where to begin. Jessica finally broke the silence. I'm sorry about Mark. He was a good man, kind. He deserved better than what happened to him. I nodded, swallowing past the lump in my throat. Yes, he was. And yes, he did. And I'm sorry I wasn't there for you, she continued, her eyes downcast. At the funeral, I mean. And before that, during his illness. I should have been there. Why weren't you? I asked, the question that had been burning inside me finally escaping. You're not cruel, Jess. Thoughtless sometimes, maybe, but not cruel. So why weren't you there when I needed my sister? She sighed deeply. Honestly, at first it was because Mom and Dad always made it seem like everything was under control. Like Mark was responding well to treatment, like you had all the help you needed. They downplayed how serious it was. I frowned. That's not an excuse. You could have called me directly. You could have checked in. You're right, she admitted. And then later, when I realized how bad things were, I was ashamed. Ashamed that I'd stayed away so long, that I'd believed Mom and Dad's sanitized version. I didn't know how to show up halfway through and admit I'd been oblivious. So, you just didn't show up at all? She winced. It sounds terrible when you put it like that. But yes, that's essentially what happened. I kept putting it off, thinking there would be more time, and then suddenly there wasn't. I sipped my latte, considering her words. And the funeral? You couldn't even make it to that? Jessica's face flushed with shame. Mom and Dad made it clear that attending my promotion party was non-negotiable. You know how they are when they've decided something is important. And I let them convince me that it was more important than being there for you. I'm so sorry. Ella, I have no excuse. I closed my eyes briefly, the familiar pain of being secondary in my family's priorities washing over me. No, you don't. I know, she said quietly, and I don't expect forgiveness. But after seeing Mom and Dad yesterday, how they were trying to take over your life, I realized I've been complicit in how they treat you. I've benefited from being the favorite without ever challenging them on it. Her admission stunned me. Jessica had never before acknowledged the disparity in how our parents treated us. Thank you for saying that, I managed finally. It means more than you know. She reached across the table, hesitantly placing her hand over mine. I want to be a better sister to you, Ella, and a better aunt to Ethan, if you'll let me. I didn't. Pull my hand away. I'd like that, but I need to know that you're not just here as their proxy, that you're not going to report back to them or try to convince me to do what they want. I'm not, she promised fervently. In fact, I told them last night that I thought they were being horrible, trying to profit from your loss. We had a huge fight about it. They're not speaking to me right now. I raised my eyebrows, genuinely surprised. Really? You fought with them? Over me? She nodded, looking almost proud. First time for everything, right? It felt good, actually. Like maybe I'm finally growing a spine at 34. Despite everything, I smiled. Better late than never. Way late, she agreed ruefully. But I'm here now. Whatever you need, I'm here. We talked for over an hour, more openly than we had in years. Jessica told me about her own struggles, the pressure to excel, the constant fear of disappointing our parents, the loneliness of being placed on a pedestal. I told her about the reality of Mark's illness, the beautiful and terrible moments of his final days, my fears for Ethan's future. By the time we parted, something had shifted between us. Not forgiveness exactly. The wounds were too deep and too fresh for that, but a tentative bridge spanning the chasm of our shared history. "Can I come see Ethan sometime?" she asked as we stood to leave. "I've been a pretty terrible aunt so far. I'd like to change that." I nodded. "He'd like that. He's been asking about you, actually. He remembers the puppet show you put on for him. At Christmas." Her face lit up. "He does? That was over a year ago." "He has a good memory," I said, feeling a pang as I thought of all Mark would miss in our son's life. Like his father. Jessica hugged me then, a real hug, not the brief, perfunctory embraces we'd exchanged at family gatherings over the years. "I'm going to do better," she whispered fiercely. "I promise." I wanted to believe her. Despite everything, a part of me still yearned for the sister relationship I'd never had. The next few weeks brought a fragile new normal. Ethan and I settled into our life without Mark, finding new routines that honored his memory while allowing us to move forward. Linda and Robert remained our rocks, and to my surprise, Jessica became a regular presence in our lives. She visited often, bringing thoughtful gifts for Ethan and actually listening when I talked about my grief. My parents, however, maintained their campaign to help me manage Mark's estate. They sent emails with financial articles, left voicemails about the real estate market, even forwarded listings for apartments they deemed suitable for Ethan and me. I ignored it all. Then came the certified letter from a law firm. With shaking hands, I opened it to find a formal request for a meeting to discuss the financial interests of Ethan Walsh, minor child, as represented by his maternal grandparents. I called my own lawyer immediately, forwarding him the letter. His response was swift and reassuring. "They have no standing," he repeated. "None whatsoever. This is an intimidation tactic, nothing more. They're hoping you'll be frightened into complying with their wishes rather than face legal proceedings." "What should I do?" I asked, still rattled. "Let me respond," he said firmly. "I'll make it clear that any further attempts to interfere in your financial affairs or to intimidate you will be met with appropriate legal action from our side." True to his word, he sent a strongly worded letter to my parents' lawyers, outlining the situation in no uncertain terms. I was Ethan's mother, and Mark's widow, the executor of his will and the trustee of Ethan's trust fund. My parents had no legal right to intervene in any way, and any further attempts to do so would be considered harassment. The response was swift. My parents showed up at my door that very evening, faces thunderous with anger. "How dare you sick a lawyer on us?" my father raged as soon as I opened the door. "We're trying to protect our grandson's interests. By threatening legal action against his mother?" I asked coldly. "That's your idea of protection?" "You're being irrational," my mother insisted. "We only want what's best for Ethan." "No," I said firmly. "You want control of Mark's money. You want me to sell our home. You want to dictate how I live my life as a widow. None of that is about what's best for Ethan." "You've always been difficult," my father snapped. "Always thinking you know better than everyone else." "Not everyone else," I corrected. "Just you. And in this case, I do know better. I know what Mark wanted for our son. I know what I want for our future. And it doesn't include selling our home or handing control of our finances over to you." Mother's face hardened. "We could fight you on this, you know. Take you to court." "On what grounds?" I challenged. "My lawyer is very clear. You have no legal standing whatsoever." "Things can change," my father said ominously. "A grieving widow, struggling to cope. Who knows what a judge might decide is in Ethan's best interests." The threat was unmistakable, and something in me snapped. "Get out," I said, my voice deadly calm. "Get out of my house and don't come back. Ever." "Ella, no. You've just threatened to try to take my son away from me. There's no coming back from that. We're done." My father stepped closer, his face red with anger. "You can't keep us from our grandson. We have rights." "Actually, I can," I said, standing my ground. "And you don't. Not unless I choose to grant them, which, as of this moment, I don't." "You'll regret this," my mother said, her voice cold. "When you're all alone, with no one to help you, you'll regret pushing us away." I laughed, the sound harsh and disbelieving. "I'm not alone. I have Linda and Robert. I have Jessica. Yes, Jessica, who's finally seen you for who you really are. I have friends who've shown more love and support than you ever have. I'm many things right now, grieving, scared, overwhelmed. But I am not alone." My father opened his mouth to respond, but I cut him off. "Leave now, or I'll call the police and report you for trespassing. Your choice." They left, but not without a parting shot. "This isn't over, Ella, not by a long shot." I closed the door behind them, my heart pounding but my resolve firm. It was over. My relationship with my parents, the constant hope that they might someday see me, value me, love me as I deserved to be loved. It was all over, and despite the pain, I felt a curious sense of relief. I called Jessica that night and told her what had happened. "They did what?" she gasped, her shock evident even over the phone. "They threatened to try to take Ethan from you?" "Not in so many words," I clarified, but the implication was clear. I don't even have words," she said, her voice tight with anger. "I knew they were being unreasonable, but this is beyond the pale." "I've cut them off," I said simply. "Completely. I told them they're not welcome in my home or in my life." "I don't blame you," she said firmly. "I wouldn't blame you if you never spoke to them again after this." Her ready support brought unexpected tears to my eyes. "Thank you for understanding." "Of course I understand," she said fiercely. "They crossed a line, a massive, unforgivable line." We talked for a while longer, Jessica assuring me that she stood with me, that she wouldn't try to act as a go-between or pressure me to reconcile. When we hung up, I felt stronger, more certain of my decision. I called Linda next, needing her steadying presence. "They did what?" She echoed Jessica's response, her voice tight with controlled anger. "Robert and I will be right over. You shouldn't be alone tonight." Despite my protests that we were fine, they arrived an hour later, Robert carrying an overnight bag and Linda bearing a casserole and a bottle of wine. "We're staying in the guest room tonight," she announced, brooking no argument. "I'm not leaving. You alone, after what those people said to you." Their protectiveness brought fresh tears, but they were tears of gratitude rather than despair. This was what family should be. People who showed up, who supported without controlling, who loved without conditions. The next morning, I woke to the smell of coffee and the sound of Ethan's laughter from downstairs. I found him in the kitchen, with Linda and Robert helping to make pancakes, his small face alight with joy. "Mommy," he exclaimed when he saw me. "Grandma and Grandpa are teaching me to flip pancakes." Linda shot me a questioning look over Ethan's head, checking if the Grandma and Grandpa labels were okay. I nodded, smiling through sudden tears. Mark's parents had been more like real grandparents to Ethan than my parents ever had. Why shouldn't he call them what they truly were? Robert squeezed my shoulder as I joined them at the counter. "How are you feeling this morning?" "Stronger," I said, surprising myself with how true it was. "Clearer." Linda handed me a cup of coffee. "Good. Because we need to talk about next steps. I don't trust your parents to simply accept your decision and leave you alone. She was right, of course. Over the next few weeks, my parents escalated their campaign. They sent more legal letters, which my lawyer handled firmly. They showed up at Ethan's preschool, trying to take him out early, only to be turned away when the staff consulted the approved pickup list and found their names missing. They even contacted some of our mutual friends, spinning a tale of how I was having a breakdown and needed intervention. Through it all, I remained resolute. I documented every attempt at contact, every thinly veiled threat, building a case for harassment should I need it. Linda and Robert stood beside me unflinchingly, and Jessica proved her new commitment by firmly taking my side, even when it meant facing our parents' wrath. It was Jessica who finally got through to them. Nearly 3 months after Mark's death, I told them I'd go public, she explained when she called to tell me the news. I said I'd tell everyone, their friends, their colleagues, their precious country club circle, exactly what they've been doing. How they missed their son-in-law's funeral for a party. How they've been trying to get control of his money. How they threatened to try to take Ethan away from you. All of it. You didn't, I gasped, knowing how much our image-conscious parents would hate such exposure. I absolutely did, she confirmed, a note of pride in her voice. I told them I'd start with a detailed Facebook post and work my way up to calling the partners at Dad's firm. I couldn't help but laugh at the audacity. And they believed you? Oh, yes, she said with satisfaction. They know I have all the receipts, the emails, the legal letters, the whole sordid mess, and they know their precious reputation wouldn't survive it. So what did they say? They've agreed to back off, completely. No more legal threats, no more showing up unannounced, no more trying to access Ethan at school. They'll respect your boundaries from now on. I sank into a chair, relief washing over me. Do you believe them? Honestly? Yes, Jessica said. They're terrified of public scandal. It's the one thing they truly fear. They'll comply to avoid it. Thank you, I said softly, for standing up to them, for standing with me. It's what sisters do, she replied simply, what I should have been doing all along. True to Jessica's prediction, my parents retreated completely. The legal letters stopped. The unexpected visits ceased. They made no further attempts to contact Ethan or me. It was as if they had finally accepted that they couldn't control this situation, couldn't bend it to their will. 6 months after Mark's death, I received a letter from my mother, a handwritten note, not a legal document. In it, she expressed regret for their behavior, though she stopped short of a true apology. She wrote of missing Ethan, of hoping that someday we might find a way forward as a family. She didn't mention Mark once. I showed the letter to Linda, who had become my closest confidant. What do you think? I asked her, genuinely uncertain. Is this a peace offering or just another manipulation? Linda read it carefully before responding. I think it's a step, she said finally. Not a big one, not enough yet, but a step. The question is, do you want to take a step in return? I considered the question seriously. I don't know. Part of me wants to just move on without them. We're doing well, Ethan and I. We have you and Robert, we have Jessica now, really have her for the first time. Do we need more? It's not about need, Linda said gently. It's about what you want for your life going forward, and what you want for Ethan. What did I want? The question lingered as spring turned to summer, as Ethan finished preschool and we planned a small vacation with Linda and Robert. As Jessica became a regular fixture in our lives, taking Ethan for outings and sitting with me on quiet evenings when the loneliness of Mark's absence became too much to bear alone. Eventually, I wrote back to my mother, a short note, setting clear boundaries. If they wanted a relationship with Ethan, it would be on my terms. Supervised visits only, no discussions of money or Mark's estate, no criticism of my parenting or life choices. I made it clear that any Violation of these terms would result in immediate and permanent cutting of ties. Their response was surprisingly acquiescent. They agreed to my terms without argument, asking only when they might be allowed to see Ethan. I arranged a brief meeting at a public park where Jessica and Linda would both be present as my support system. The reunion was awkward, strained by the weight of all that had happened. My parents seemed smaller somehow, less intimidating than they had always appeared in my mind. They brought a gift for Ethan, a complex building set that was far too advanced for a 5-year-old, showing that they still didn't really know him at all. But they tried. They asked him questions about his interests, listened to his rambling stories with apparent attention, didn't once mention their own importance or achievements. It was the most normal interaction I had ever witnessed between them and anyone, including me. As we were leaving, my father pulled me aside. "Thank you," he said stiffly, "for allowing this." I nodded, not quite ready to say "you're welcome" for something that should have been a given, not a concession. "We made mistakes," he continued, clearly uncomfortable with the admission. "Serious ones. I won't ask for forgiveness, but I hope we can find a way forward." It wasn't an apology, not really, but it was more acknowledgement of wrongdoing than I had ever received from him before. "We'll see," I said, neither promising nor rejecting the possibility, one step at a time. Over the following months, we established a cautious new relationship. My parents were on their best behavior during their supervised visits with Ethan, never once pushing boundaries or making inappropriate requests. They didn't ask to babysit or take him for outings alone. They didn't criticize my parenting decisions. They didn't mention Mark's estate or my financial situation. It wasn't forgiveness, not yet. Maybe not ever for some aspects of what had happened. But it was a kind of peace, a laying down of weapons after a long and bitter war. 1 year after Mark's death, I held a small memorial gathering at our home. Linda and Robert were there, of course, and Jessica, and a few close friends who had stood by us through the darkest days. To my surprise, my parents asked if they could attend. After careful consideration, I agreed, with clear expectations about their behavior. They came, subdued and respectful, bringing a framed photo of Mark with Ethan that I had never seen before. A candid shot from a family gathering years earlier, the two of them laughing together, their matching dimples on full display. It was a thoughtful gift, one that showed they had at least tried to consider what would matter to me. As the evening progressed, I found myself standing alone on the back porch, looking up at the stars. The same stars Mark and I had gazed at countless times, planning our future, dreaming of watching Ethan grow up together. A future cut tragically short, dreams only half realized. Linda joined me, wrapping a shawl around my shoulders against the evening chill. "What are you thinking about?" she asked softly. "Mark," I said simply. "What he would think of all this, of me, of how I've handled everything." "He would be so proud of you," she said without hesitation. "So incredibly proud of your strength, your resilience, your fierce protection of Ethan, and the life you built together." "Do you think so?" I asked, needing the reassurance even after all this time. "I know so," she said firmly. "You've honored him in every decision you've made, Ella. You've stayed true to what the two of you wanted for Ethan, for your future. You haven't compromised or given in to pressure. Mark would be in awe of you. I know I am." I leaned my head. Against her shoulder, this woman who had become more mother to me than my own ever had. "Thank you," I whispered, "for everything, for being family in the truest sense of the word." "Always," she promised, "for as long as you and Ethan need us. And then some." Inside, I could hear Ethan's laughter mingling with Jessica's voice as they played some game together. I could see Robert deep in conversation with one of Mark's colleagues, likely sharing stories about the man they had both admired. And in a quiet corner, my parents sat, present but not central, included, but not influential, exactly the role they had earned in our lives. It wasn't the future Mark and I had planned. It wasn't the family structure I had once envisioned. But it was ours now. This patchwork of relationships, some strengthened by adversity, others cautiously rebuilding, from the ashes of betrayal, all revolving around the bright center that was Ethan, carrying his father's smile and dimples and kindness into a future that wouldn't include Mark, but would always, always honor him. As I looked up at the night sky again, a shooting star traced a brief, brilliant path across the darkness, a sign, perhaps, or just a beautiful cosmic coincidence. Either way, I chose to take it as a reminder. Even in the darkest times, there is light to be found if you know where to look. In the steadfast love of true family, in the unexpected growth of strained relationships, in the resilience of a human heart, battered but unbroken. And most of all, in the enduring legacy of love, stronger than death, stronger than grief, stronger than all the forces that had tried to diminish or control it. Mark's love for me and for Ethan. My love for both of them. The kind of love that builds homes and futures and families, not by blood or obligation, but by choice, by presence, by showing up when it matters most. That was Mark's true inheritance to us. Not money or property or possessions, but the knowledge of what real love looks like, what real family means. A lesson I would carry forward, for Ethan and for myself, into whatever future awaited us.